All right, there it is. So we're going to be talking about at-home executive functioning strategies today. Like I said, I'm a licensed educational psychologist, so I'll share briefly about who we are and how that applies in what we're talking about today. So my company is Empowered Child Learning. We are a group of providers who are looking to help children understand how their brain works, how their unique learning needs, and help their families know how to best support them at home and at school. Um, we provide assessments for something called IEEs, and that's where a school district approves for a parent to have a private evaluation done. We do school-based assessments, parent coaching, counseling, social groups, and then the most applicable is executive functioning support. So Brain Balance is really good at providing tools to help students connect different parts of their brain to enhance certain skills we need in the school setting. And then we have a structured approach with executive functioning support with parents or the strategies to help them continue to follow cognitive skills. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at how does executive functioning impact daily life? What can we do to help our kids with organization, time management, problem-solving skills? Executive functioning difficulties can be, they're often genetic. So some of these things as a parent, you may have a hard time with, and that's okay. To share a little bit about me, I've been in the field of education for about 20, almost 20 years, and I've learned a lot over this and how it's not my strength. So I really enjoy talking about executive functioning because I've learned a lot and seen the benefits in my own life, as well as for my children who also have executive functioning difficulties. So it's possible to make strides in this area and build an environment that's supportive of planning, goal setting, and then follow through, which I know is something that a lot of us can have a hard time doing with like the day-to-day minutia of life and getting kids to practices and services and sports and just all the things that we have to balance in a day. So we're going to start with a universal understanding of executive functioning. So it refers to different parts of the brain, the way our brain processes information. It helps us plan, focus, remember instructions, and kind of multitask. I'm going to go more into the key components and everyday examples, but I am going to have us watch a video that is really helpful in executive function. Okay.
Organized? Do they have trouble focusing on more than one thing at a time? And what's up with them not remembering any of the instructions you just gave them? Expecting that your young child will be as organized as you or have as much, not quite developmentally accurate. When your child reaches preschool age, they are just starting to exhibit the skills of executive function, and it is your job to help nourish that growth. What is executive function? Executive function is a set of mental processes that enable us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, juggle multiple tasks successfully, and link past experiences to the present. To better understand this concept of executive function, let's take a look at what is going on within the brain. It all starts in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is the most advanced part of the brain. In humans, it makes up almost the whole front third of the brain. It helps monitor and regulate your emotional circuits and habit circuits. For example, if a person is mad and their immediate reaction is to scream and throw punches, the prefrontal cortex allows them to come up with a more productive reaction, like explaining their feelings or taking some deep breaths to calm down. This part of your brain is also in charge of planning and getting stuff done. This can range from devising a little white lie or plotting revenge to going to the bathroom or planning a trip around the world. Importantly, it is also the slowest part of the brain to develop, continuing to mature until your mid-20s. So it's highly influenced by experiences, especially during the preschool years. A child is not born with executive function skills, but they are born with the potential to develop them. The skills of executive function depend on 3 different types of brain functions that are primarily mediated by the prefrontal cortex: working memory, mental flexibility, and self-control. Let's break each of these three skills down. Working memory is the ability to retain and use distinct pieces of information over short periods of time. Mental flexibility is the ability to sustain or shift attention in response to different demands or to apply different roles to different settings. Self-control enables us to set priorities and resist impulsive actions or responses. As you can see, the three executive function skills, working memory, mental flexibility, and self-control, affect almost every aspect of our day. Realizing that children are still learning and not just being bad can be a refreshing perspective for us adults to remember. So next time you realize that your child needs help following directions, staying focused, or seeing something from a different perspective, think of it as an opportunity to support and nurture brain development. When a child feels nurtured, their brain releases the hormone oxytocin, which reduces stress and allows the prefrontal cortex to flourish. Kids learn better by watching and imitating than they do by being taught. If you put pressure on your child to use these functions in a way that ignores their level of development, then you're likely increasing their stress and thus working against your own interests. Your love and the example you set are foundational to your child's mental development. This video.
So, I like that video because I feel like it gives us a good picture of where we are as parents with executive functioning. And it lets us know, that it's not because our kids are, being naughty or trying to get in trouble by lying, which often happens with kids with executive functioning deficits, but it's more about this is a skill deficit. So when that opportunity comes up, when they say they packed their lunch but they didn't, or they say they finished their homework but they only did half of it, we want to look at, okay, what skill do I need to teach them to understand how to solve this problem for next time? A lot of executive functioning is about problem solving, and we have to be able to plan, change a plan if it's not working, and be flexible, and then control our emotions, right? All of these parts of executive function work together. And in that frontal lobe, that front part of our brain, as the video said, it's one of the last to develop. And if your child has a neurodivergency like ADHD, dyslexia, any kind of learning disability or cognitive delays, sometimes the executive functioning can be delayed 2 to 5 years. So that means if your child is 8 and they have ADHD, they might be operating a sport. We also have to be able to be flexible if a plan's not working and know to change it, and adapt to changes and things going on and ignoring distractions. All of these things happen to us kind of no matter where we are in our life, and they're essential life skills. Um, so like I mentioned, this helps us get through tasks, not just at school, but just everything in our day-to-day environment. Knowing how to plan, like if I need to be out the door by 8 a.m. for school, I have to kind of go back and see, well, what time do I need to wake up and how long is each task I need to do going to take me? For a lot of kids, they don't have that development yet to know what that looks like. And that's where we as parents and guardians can come in and provide, let's break this down and show you what that looks like so you can cue those executive functioning skills that are starting to develop in your brain, but might not be firing independently. So some kids have the capacity, meaning they have the skills to do the tasks. Like if you give them a list, they can do it. But if you don't give them that list, they don't get started. And sometimes as a parent, that can be very frustrating. But that's showing you as a parent, they have the capacity. They can brush their teeth, get dressed, pack their bag for school, etc. But they need a structure to get that, to cue that part of their brain to get it done. And executive functioning is also where we house or where we regulate a lot of our emotions. and how we deal with stress and resiliency. How do we problem solve? Do we keep trying the same thing over and over, or are we open-minded and willing to shift to try a different way? That cognitive flexibility is part of executive functioning, and oftentimes kids that have difficulties with it will insist on doing something their way, even though it's not working, and they're getting frustrated. And so because of that, they may have a hard time solving a problem when their solution isn't working or coming up with an alternate solution. And in school, they may have a hard time starting tasks, organizing their time, following complex instructions. So they may be very intelligent, but if you give them multi-step instructions, they may get lost at step two. So they don't get to show how intelligent they are because they don't remember the steps. And that can cause frustration for kids in school and decrease motivation and at home too, especially because homework, as it becomes a bigger piece, those executive functioning skills are more and more required. So we'll talk about some strategies for supporting executive functioning. We're going to break it down into some more specific areas. So there's lots of subcategories of executive function skills because it is such a complex part. So I'm going to elaborate a little more about different areas where we can use strategies at home. So planning is a big one. A lot of times we implicitly expect kids to understand how to plan for something, especially in the school setting, versus explicitly teaching them how to do it. So what I mean by that is a teacher may assign your child an assignment, but maybe they haven't mapped out how that child should exactly do that assignment. Some teachers do. Some teachers do a fabulous job of like, this is what each step is going to look like. But sometimes it's more of like, here's an assignment, you're going to figure out how to put this together and make this end product. So that could involve at home drawing, writing out, or using a calendar, depending on where your child is developmentally, to see what does that product look like at the end and how can we start to make steps for it. Planning can look really simple if like you're having them do homework. Maybe you write 3 items on a whiteboard, 5 problems of math, 2-minute break, reading for 10 minutes. And as they do each task, they cross it off. So it doesn't have to be a very like elaborate plan. It can be something really simple, and as long as you're making it visual for them to look back at. If you have a younger child, you can use pictures for cueing those kind of things. And then backwards planning is a strategy that really helps kids beginning with the end in mind. So thinking about, well, what is my project or assignment going to look like completed? So what steps do I need to go to get there? Okay, if I'm writing an essay, I'm going to have a rough draft. I'm going to have an outline before I have a rough draft. I'm going to have like a thesis, and then I'm gonna have to have a topic, going back and back and back till you get to the point of given the directions of the assignment. And that can really help kids know, okay, like this is what it's supposed to look like, but I have all these steps to get there. So now I feel like I have a plan. Working memory is another important part of executive function. So we can help support that by breaking it down into smaller parts. That's something called chunking. So what we tend to do as parents or as, adults is give long directions, right? Like you might say, okay, well, we're gonna get ready to go to school. So I need you to get your backpack, and I need you to meet me by the door and get your shoes. Oh, and get your jacket, because it's going to be cold today. Like you've already just given so many pieces of information for them to remember. So if I'm working with a child with executive functioning needs, I might say the directions, but then I might say, okay, backpack, shoes, jacket, go. And then they can repeat backpack, shoes, jacket. Okay, I got my backpack. Now I need to get my shoes and my jacket. Okay, got my shoes. Okay, now I need to get my jacket. So we can break it down into just the of information for them to remember, especially when it's a short period of time. Our brain can memorize information for working memory for about 20 to 30 seconds. And they usually can remember on average about like 3 to 5 steps or 3 to 5 things. For the average brain, if you have executive functioning deficits, you might be closer to like 2 or 3 steps or 2 or 3 things. So we want to make sure we're trying to give the amount of pieces of information our kid's brain can hold, to match what they can do, right? So if I know my son can only do 3 words at a time, working memory wise, I'm going to give him 3 words and then wait for him to come back and then give him the next set. Um, Visualization also helps for working memory or just knowing what something's supposed to look like. So that can be like a picture of what we call like the done. Um, there is a speech pathologist, Sarah Ward, who goes a lot into executive functioning, and one of her strategies is called the done. So, like basically having a picture of what it's supposed to look like finished. So, let's say your child is working on cleaning their room and making their bed is just a disaster. So, maybe there's a picture of this is what your bed looks like made. I'm going to hold it up next to the bed that you said is made, doesn't match. Um, and then you can also reinforce learning through review and practice. So the more we would create these habits, the more routine it gets and the more automatic it gets for kids, especially with routine, with things they're doing daily. Um, Task initiation is another area where executive functioning can impact us. So starting with an example or a model can really help. A lot of times, um, our life is very auditory based, meaning like we get a lot of auditory information, but most people are multimodal learners. So what that means is we learn a combination of auditory, visual, kinesthetic. So hearing something is oftentimes not enough to get started on a task. So when you have an example or a model to look at or see, it can be really helpful. Brainstorming before starting a task can be really helpful, whether that's brainstorming out loud or drawing or writing some ideas and just taking that time to get thinking about what am I going to be doing? What might that look like? And then starting the task. So getting your brain already kind of thinking, getting that prefrontal cortex accessing those initiation skills. And then sometimes with students starting non-preferred tasks, meaning like things they don't want to do, can really get in the way of their task initiation. So sometimes just breaking down the first 3 steps and how long they think those 3 steps will take. Usually, if there's a hard time with a child starting a task, you want that to be a short amount of time for them to get started. So if I'm working with a child and they have a hard time with math, I might tell them, "Hey, let's just do the first 2 problems. I bet it's going to take you like 3 minutes. Should we set a timer and see?" And then, oh, okay, great. You worked for 3 minutes. Good job. Look how far you got. Let's take a break. So like getting them to do small chunks of work and then taking frequent short breaks is more efficient for their brain than it is to make them sit and be at like the table doing homework for like 30 minutes and you're all yelling at each other and crying and all the things happen and kind of fall apart. And that kind of piggies back into self-monitoring. So when you want your child to be independent, we want to look for tools that help them do that. So help them get work done without us having to be right there verbally prompting and telling them what to do. So self-monitoring is a skill to be aware of what you should be doing and to continue on that path. So basically it's not just starting the task, but actually going through all the steps and completing it accurately. So checklists can be really helpful. Setting timers for how long they have to work or should work on a task can be helpful. And then, like I mentioned earlier, doing those frequent breaks and working in short bursts of time. And breaks I usually recommend to families, breaks are like 2 to 5 minutes and they should incorporate movement. If you have younger kids, YouTube has Go Noodle, which has some really fun, easy, like little brain break things. You can even have kids go out and do like an obstacle course if you have a yard space to do that, or they can create like a series of activities they can do, whether it's like jumping jacks or maybe they do wall push-ups or something like that. So there's different fun activities you can come up with, but they should be moving during their breaks, not sitting like on a phone. Organization. So a lot of times kids that have executive functioning difficulties have a really hard time with organization. This is one of my weaker areas, executive functioning wise. So I empathize with those of you who are working with organ people that have difficulty with organization or you yourself does. So teaching them systems and one system at a time, like everything has a home. This is where it goes. For kids that have executive functioning difficulties, if you have multiple systems, that can be overwhelming. So if they're having a hard time bringing papers to and from school, have one folder or one binder and everything just goes in there. Um, and you want to establish routines that are based on organization and then practice them. A lot of times we can create like and be okay. Or with flexibility, it can be knowing, oh, wow, the solution I'm trying isn't working. I should pick something else. So part of preparing kids to move from one thing to another, like if you know they're moving from playing outside to doing homework and it's preferred to non-preferred, you want to tell them ahead of time what's going to happen. One of the worst things you can do for kids with executive functioning difficulties is tell them in the moment when something they don't like is going to happen, right? So if you wait until, okay, now it's time to do homework. A lot of times, what will happen, especially with younger kids, is like tears, crying, protesting. So we need to prepare them ahead of time. Having difficulty shifting and being flexible can sometimes trigger our anxiety, which is we might go into fight, flight, or freeze. So that means we might be defensive, we might avoid the thing we don't want to do, which is flight, or freeze, we kind of just shut down. So if you're noticing that with your children when you're going to trying to have them do things like homework or cleaning their room or other tasks that are usually executive function heavy, you want to prepare them ahead of time. You want to let them know when it's coming and give some control over it. Do you want to clean your room in 2 minutes or 5 minutes? Okay, great. We're going to set the timer for maybe you decide on 4 minutes. And we're gonna check the timer when there's 2 minutes and 1 minute left, so you know it's coming. So having a timer to help them know when transitions are coming, and then this thing called front loading, telling them what's going to happen before it happens, is really helpful. And then for some kids, it's really hard to move on when there's been an incident or a problem that's occurred that maybe hasn't been able to be completely solved. So I'm going to give you an example. Like if you have more than one kid, maybe um, they got in a fight with their brother about something and, they still need to talk it out, but their emotions are high, so we're going to talk it out later. But maybe your child keeps talking about, oh, well, he did this and he did that, and they can't focus on homework. So something you can do is create something called a thought lot where maybe you have a post-it whiteboard, something where they can draw or write or dictate to you what they want you to write to talk about later. And then you can decide when that later is. Maybe it's before dinner, or maybe it's at another designated time. You set a time and alarm so that you guys know to talk about it. That can help kids get things out of their mind so they can move on to whatever the task is at hand. Or maybe they want to talk to you about what they are learning in class. And you're like, okay, great. I definitely want to hear about that. But the first thing we need to do is we need to finish getting ready for this or whatever it is, or we need you to do this certain step first. Or maybe they want to tell you about their plans when they turn their next birthday, but they just had their birthday. You're like, let's put that on the thought lot. And you could tell me your birthday plans over dinner. And then decluttering is another thing that sometimes we forget. Um, with kids with executive functioning issues, they can be very distracted. So we want to make a space that's minimal distractions, less is more. We want to also consider like the noise level around them. It may be hard to them to tune out those distractors. Maybe they need headphones or to be in a different area. We want to have lighting be at the right level if your kid has sensitivity to light or just sensory issues in general. Noise and light can really throw off their system, and that can make them go into that fight, flight, or freeze more easily because they're not regulated enough to do an executive function heavy task. So if we're In that fight, flight, or freeze, our executive function, that prefrontal cortex, is not as accessible as it is when we're calm. That's why your child can like tell you maybe what they should have done in a situation when they were upset, when they've calmed back down, right? Because their prefrontal cortex has kicked back in and can be like, oh yeah, I should have told my sister, please don't take that instead of grabbing it from her or whatever. So we want to make sure that our kids are calm and regulated by having a reduced clutter space, lighting that's light enough for them to do homework, but and then a noise level that you concentrate. We want to build routines and practice them using a great tool is using first then prompts. Like, this is what we do first, then we can do this. And then giving that immediate reinforcement for following those routines. A lot of times we kind of look for, it's easier to like point out the bad or what's not happening versus like catching them being good. So you want to catch them following that routine. Like, wow, I love the way you sat at your homework station and took out your agenda. That was really, really smart. I love how you're starting that on your own. Giving specific praise is really helpful. Or saying, like, I noticed you were getting really frustrated with sister. I really like how you told her how you felt and used your words. So, those kind of things help with increasing the likelihood of using strategies again. And then having practical implementation tips would be like involving children in organizing their space or creating visuals. A fun thing that I like to do with my own kids and families we work with are using pictures of the kid doing a task. Like if you're creating a visual schedule for your kid to get ready in the morning, maybe you have a picture of them brushing their teeth. Uh, of them eating breakfast or whatever. So, and having their buy-in is very important. So, if you don't have their buy-in, they're not usually going to use it. And so, it's really important to get their input, make something that's not just something you think they should use, but something they think they should use as well. I'm going to go over some time management techniques. Some of these have clickable links, and I'll point those out. So, a lot of times we use timers, but we're not actually showing kids the time. So, timers can be really helpful to keep us going because we have to make time visible. So, you guys have probably all heard that phrase, out of sight, out of mind, right? So, that's very true for most of us, and then very true for people with ADHD or executive function issues. It's like that time blindness. You may have heard that phrase before. So we got to make it visible, something we can see and track. It's a time is a very abstract comment concept, excuse me, for kids that have executive functioning difficulties. So visual timers, if you go on like Amazon or any place you can type in visual timers and they will come up. They're pretty affordable, but that helps make, or you can download an app that your child could use to see how time starts to disappear. And like, wow, like for this example, the shaded part of the timer gets smaller and smaller. So they see, oh, wow, I only have 5 minutes left, or I only have 2 minutes left. So they can keep track of the time. Usually in the beginning, you have to prompt them to look at the timer because sometimes they'll just kind of be in zone doing whatever their tasks they're doing. So you have to model for them how to look at that, keep track, and know, okay, I'm going to get ready to transition to this next thing. I have 2 minutes left. I should be at this point. Did I need more time? Getting them in the habit that time is something that they can see and have to be aware of. And we talked about chunking earlier about making directions shorter and more manageable. A lot of times we need to do that when we ask our kids to do general things, such as cleaning their room, making their lunch. And it might need to be broken down into what does that look like. So this is an example actually of the visual my son uses to pack his lunch. And so we have different choices of what he can put in his lunch and in a picture example so he can open his lunchbox and be like, okay, did I match? And he has different categories of what he can choose. So if it's like I mentioned earlier, if the task is to clean your room, you can break it down with visuals or just a checklist depending on your child's age to get those things done. And then estimation of time. This is a really important skill that will teach kids as they get older, like how to plan their day and to know how much to allow. So we want them to start making predictions. How long do you think this is going to take? Let's make a goal. I'm going to get my 7 math problems done in 15 minutes. Okay, so that's my goal. My plan is I'm gonna, use a timer. I'm gonna get my homework done in 15, my math homework done in 15 minutes. And I'm gonna allow myself to take a 2-minute break in between at, minute 7 or whatever. So they have a specific plan, then they do it, and then we see does oops, sorry. Oops. There we go. So then we see, did it work? So we can revise and revisit how did it go. So let's say they're like, I can get my homework done in 15 minutes. It actually took them 25. We might say, wow, so we do need to plan for more time to do math homework next time. Okay. So how can we make sure to do that? We might need to start it earlier so that it doesn't interrupt dinner time. Those kind of things. So we're going through the motions after we make a prediction. There's a linked example here. It's a free Teachers Pay Teachers, if you know that website, a download of an example of a goal plan do review. There's lots of options out there, but that's just a quick example that's free. So free is always nice. Um, and then you can also have routine checks. So we have to see, are these skills working? Do we need to change things? Sometimes that can be just like, looking at, are we getting out the door on time? Are we making it to where we need to be? Are things happening on our to-do list in a time within the time it's expected? Those can be like scheduled routine check-ins. Maybe it's a weekly that you sit down with your child and be like, okay, what's working? What's having a harder time? Could be a weekly family meeting. There's a template for like what that might be, what's included in a family meeting. It can be more specific to executive functioning skills, but it can also be more general where you're connecting as a family and talking about what routines are working, what things need to be changed, in addition to like sharing about your week and connecting. Okay. And then we also want to look at how can we create a supportive environment. So when we're writing or not writing, sometimes we're writing goals or we're creating goals and follow through, we want to make sure that they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, or time bound. This is if you've maybe you've heard this acronym, a SMART goal. We have to be able to measure what we're expecting our kids to do, like, and have it make sense. So we may have, you know, you agree to have your child do homework from 3 to 4 p.m. They're supposed to get their math, science, and reading done with taking breaks every 20 minutes, and they're taking 2 to 5 minute breaks, and they will get 80% of their homework done or more from 3 to 4 p.m. And then you measure it, right? Is this happening? Are we missing assignments? Do we need more time for certain things? Are we getting distracted? And then if you get in the habit of creating goals as a family, it can be a lot easier for kids to create their own goals as they get older. And goals are how we know what we want, and then the plan is how we're going to get there, right? So goal planning is a critical executive function skill. And then you can have visual trackers, progress charts, to keep track of a child's progress. It really helps to make it visible. Once again, visual support. So if you are tracking, how many days in a row your child uses kind words and actions, or how many days in a row they are finishing their homework before dinner. Maybe you have a chart and they color in a certain part of the chart and it shows them growing and making this progress. It feels really good to see that visibly versus just talking about it feels more abstract for most kids. And then promoting a positive environment. You want to tell your children, so children with executive functioning difficulties will respond faster to your direction if you tell them what you want to see instead of what you want them to stop. So in our brain, we it's faster if you tell us what to do versus like we have to think, okay, I need to stop yelling. So how do I need to talk? Oh, quiet voice. So if we're saying quiet voice the first time, oh yeah, quiet voice. I got to lower my voice level. So a lot of times as humans, our instinctual response is to like say what we want to stop happening that's bothering us. But as parents, we need to shift into telling our kid what we want to see instead of saying no running, walking feet, things like that. So, uh, I recommend to families to, pick some phrases of things they see a lot of the times that their kids do that they say the negative, like don't do this, stop this, and then try to come up with what would be the equivalent of what they want them to do and write them down because you're going to kind of have to memorize them, right? It's your brain wants to just say, stop doing that, know this, but you got to shift it to what you want to see. And then modeling self-regulation and problem solving really helps, just like the video said. Giving examples from your day-to-day experience um, or modeling self-talk aloud. So sometimes if I'm coming across a problem in real time and my kids are with me, I might say, huh, like, I don't know if I have enough time to make this for dinner that I planned on because I got started too late. I'm gonna have to change my plan and make something that's gonna take less time for dinner. So I'm gonna have to look at the fridge, see what's available, so I'm modeling these kind of skills out loud where I can, or I might take a part of my day during our family meeting and talk about how I changed my plan or what I did to make sure something happened on time. And they also see you doing this, but modeling the self-talk can really help because sometimes kids just think as adults, we just magically do all these things in our day and there's no like, self-talk or stress or, reliance on tools to help us get there. And then providing positive reinforcement to celebrate those small wins. It takes a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks to put in a new habit in our brain and make that more of something part of our routine. So it's a slow progression. So celebrating any kind of win can really help build that momentum, right? Motivation is a key factor in change, especially with behavior. I know there's a couple in the chat. Okay, so I'll get to some questions at the end, which we're almost at. So with executive functioning, we want to start with a few steps to try to implement different strategies in your kid's life. What I typically recommend to families is make a list of the top 2 to 3 areas where they're having a hard time. Is it organization? Is it self-regulation? Is it memory? And then from there, looking at the different tools to try. And I usually recommend um, starting with a couple of strategies over time and doing them consistently. So we're not going to like turn our kids into these executive functioning gurus tomorrow. It takes time and it takes us remembering to reinforce and building it with empathy. So that's that supportive environment and showing them this is how we plan, set goals. This is what we say we're going to do. So approaching it as a skill versus like this is a behavior we need to give a consequence toward. And like I mentioned, an action item I would recommend to families today is picking an area to start with. And whether that's the homework routine, binder organization, cleaning your room, try 1 to 2 strategies, and get your child's input too. See, like, did this work? Oh no, we need to adjust this. Okay. Or maybe there's a strategy you try that just isn't meant for your family and it isn't effective. That's okay too. There's a lot of executive functioning strategies you can try for different areas. And it's okay to say this tool isn't for me or for our family. And keeping a list of tools that do work can also be helpful too. So you can be like, oh yeah, what were we using for memory? Oh, we were using this strategy, chunking. Okay, so we have about 10, 12 minutes left. So I'm happy to take some questions. I'll be sending an updated PDF of the slides to Angie at Brain Balance, and that can be shared out with everyone who came today. Um, So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone's face or at least their name from their cameras being off.
Yeah, yeah, I was gonna say thank you so much for all those strategies. I think that takeaway page really helped me because it's a lot of really great information, but I know sometimes it's like, where do we start? So,
Totally.
yeah, thank you so much for those tips and great reminders as well, right? Building a habit takes time. And so just staying consistent and, if things don't work that first time, it's okay. We can change it or keep going until we really see if it's for us or not. But I do want to open it up to questions. I know that there was one question in the chat, which is, are there any vitamins or supplements that can help assist with executive function skills?
Yeah, so in terms of like optimal brain function, depending on your child's specific needs, a lot of times families find benefit with like magnesium, probiotics, vitamin D is an important one, those omega-3s, vitamin B as well. And just making sure also if you haven't had your child's like levels or labs measured in a while, blood work sometimes can be a good starting point if you think there might be some kind of health concern or specific deficit. Because sometimes, since I'm not a doctor, I can't speak specifically to like this, if you take this, it'll work. But those are just typically what we know from cueing optimal brain function. Those supplements can sometimes help.
Thank you.
Yeah.